Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the NRW. I'm your host, Rob Medina, and I thank you all very much for joining me here today because today I'm going to be reviewing the movie Knucklebones. So, to give a bit of a backstory about this film, I had the actor Todd Jenkins, who's also writer director as well too, on my show You're So Cool with Rob Medina last year. I had done a review for the film that he wrote and directed and starred in and did a bunch of other things with that movie in Cherokee Creek, which is a film that I love. I think that movie is a masterpiece. I think it's a great film. And there's just so many great qualities about that movie that I thoroughly did enjoy. And I was just so impressed with what everything that everyone had done on that film with the limited time they would have at points and just the limited resources. And they still made a great movie. Like, I just remember just being so impressed, but just thoroughly being entertained with that film. So Todd had recommended me that I check out the film Knucklebones, which is also another film that he's in. And at the time, I was like, yeah, I'll look into it, but not to sound dismissive. I was just like, I'll look into it. And then I kind of forgot along the way. And then he brought it to my attention again. Said, you should check out this movie. I think you would like it. If you love what we did with Cherokee Creek, you'll love this movie too. It's pretty much the same type of formula as far as the aesthetics are concerned when it comes to the horror genre that I grew up with, that he also grew up with as well too. And I said, all right, I'll look into it. Then I saw a post on social media, which I think it might have been on Todd's social media post, where they were promoting the unrated Blu-ray release for Knucklebones. And I went out, bought the movie. And when I had gotten the film, I was excited to check it out because Todd had talked highly about the movie. But having seen the film, I was thoroughly entertained with that movie. There's a lot of things about this film that reminded me of all the things I grew up with when I was born in the mid 80s, but grew up from the films from the 80s and then early 90s that was missing for quite some time, that both Todd and the writer and director of Knucklebones and Mitch Wilson had brought with these respective films. So I have both of these movies here with me. So here's the unrated director's cut for Knucklebones. You can see right here without the light glaring, which I highly recommend you guys to go and buy it. I'll make sure I have the description and link below for you guys to buy the film, because this is definitely a film worth buying if you haven't gotten it. Definitely worth watching if you're a huge fan of horror, especially for the old school like 80s and 90s horror. And then of course I also have Cherokee Creek as well too, which is a film that I think is a masterpiece in my opinion. But I'm pointing out these two films here and brought them out because of this movie. Todd had recommended to check out this film, and I'm so glad that he did, because I had a great time with this movie. Now, that's not to say that this movie was absolutely perfect. There's some things that did have issues with it, which I will point out here, but they're really not major issues that come to mind that deterred me from the film by any means. It's just little minor nitpicks on my end. So really nothing negative on the film in itself, because truthfully, Mitch wanted to make a film of horror movies that he grew up with. He is a comedy writer as well too. So he definitely had a lot of those humor into this film, which are, in my opinion, worked very well. But it's a movie that if you grew up watching 80s horror and 90s horror, where there's a lot of like slapstick type of humor at certain times with a gross, human body being ripped apart and whatever the case may be, it definitely does have that same elements that someone like myself grew up with here. This movie does have it as well too, along with Cherokee Creek. So if you're into that, this movie offers all that for you and then some. And I think you're going to walk away thoroughly entertained, just like I did, if not more, hopefully. So of course, I'll get into the plot synopsis. I may get a little bit of spoilers here, maybe not too much, because I think there's certain elements that do occur along the way, especially towards the end, that really I was like not expecting at all. And then when I saw it, how it all unfolded, it was actually a really nice, genuine surprise, and made me realize one of the reasons why I love horror so much, because this is something that a lot of horror films do very well, where they set something up and then boom, you come with a little twist ending, not like Sixth Sense twist ending, but just a twist ending where you just didn't expect it, and it actually wins you over even more. So I think this movie definitely accomplished that as well too. So again, I'll get into the plot synopsis, my positives, my negatives, and then my rating. When college students with nothing better to do stumble upon a dice game made from Knucklebones, they inadvertently release a demon. And that right there is the film in a nutshell. So now let's get into my positives. With my first positive with this movie is that I had a great time with this film. Again, I grew up watching a lot of horror movies from the 80s, some of them from the 70s as well too, the early 90s, mid 90s as well. And there was actually a certain point where I remember for a good period of time where horror was just really not up to par with what I grew up watching as a kid, all the way up until I would say the late 90s, until Scream had come out, which more or less reinvigorated the horror genre, if you will, in a very brilliant way, in my opinion as well. I think a lot of other people may agree with that as well too. But with films like Cherokee Creek, and in this case with Knucklebones, it brought back a lot of the same aesthetics that I loved about horror, which is just fun characters. Although some people have issues with horror films being that the characters are not always that fleshed out, which I do agree with 90% of the films. But even with that, with those type of movies where don't have a lot of great characters with a lot of depth into them, they're still fun characters to be around, whether it be annoying or not. But you're still invested, at least for someone like myself who loves the horror genre, for you to see their outcome, whether it be you want them to be dead, killed viciously, or you want them to survive, which in most cases that's always the case. So with this particular movie, it definitely did bring back a lot of those same aesthetics that I grew up watching with, at least old horror films that I just absolutely love, like the Friday the 13th films, and of course the Nightmare on Elm Street. Even to some degree, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, although I wasn't the biggest fan of that film or the biggest fan of the franchise, to be frank with you. I only liked the original, the remake, which I thought was fantastic. I think it's one of the best remakes I've ever seen in my life, period. But the point I'm getting at is that this movie did bring back a lot of those same enjoyment factors that I grew up watching those films of that era. And it always stayed true to that, which is what I loved about this movie, was that you're going to get some characters that are meant to be killed off, and they're just put in there. But when they are put in there, at least in this particular case here, they do serve a purpose, yes, to be body bags, but they're brought in a way that I thought worked very well for the purposes of this film, to not just take away from the overall story, but to help fill in the narrative, to be able to have some of the more fun factors that we wanted to see for a film of this sort, with the character of Knucklebones just murking people. So I think that this movie does that very, very well, and it's not hiding its true intentions. If you wanted to see a balls to the walls horror film with blood being ripped out, nudity, sex, among other things as well too, you're gonna get that with this film. So there's no secret about what this movie's intentions are, because what you see is what you get, and that's exactly what they've been promoting for this film when it first initially came out back in 2016, especially now with this unrated cut here on the Blu-ray, where you get more of those scenes that were not in the initial cut when it was released back in 2016. Having those scenes put back in here now definitely to add on more to that enjoyment factor, and really having certain things fleshed out a little bit further for you to be able to see the grotesque aspect of the film, but at the same time also get some other really important elements to the story that I thought helped filled out and fleshing out certain details that I did see in the more or less the original cut, if you will, that's still available on Tubi, which I also have in the link in the description down below if you want to see that version as well, which isn't bad. It's actually still the same film, but it does run off a little slow in the beginning. But once you hang on to it and pick up from there, it actually does move rather quickly here and just get to the point. Whereas this movie, on the other hand, at least this version, the director's cut, you are starting off right away with some insanity here. And what's wonderful about this movie too, that I can also point out, is that the characters, say what you will about them, because I know some people have a lot of critiques about, characters in horror movies. These characters are a lot of fun. And they're, in fact, a lot of the characters that someone like myself has grown up with these whole horror movies, where you have the dickhead, the goofy guy, the good guy, the people who are don't really care for others' well-being, whatever the case may be. You have that in this film. So you know exactly who to root for and who to root against. And that is the purpose of a film of this sort. You just want to know whose side you're on, and then just go on with the journey and enjoy it for the rest of the ride. And that's exactly what this film does offer here. One other thing I want to point out too with that is that Todd had talked about this movie and said great things about the film, and I could see why, because this movie does bring back all those enjoyment factors that I grew up with the 80s, like I said before. But really, it does have to do with the actor who plays the character of Knucklebones in Tom Zimbrod. Now, I have done reviews for films where I've seen a lot of Tom's work with films like Buckskin, which I think is his best acting role he's ever done. But he's also done a lot of other films as well too, where you really truly get to see a certain side of him, where he truly does pull off some great acting qualities that you can really see at the highest level, in my opinion. But with a movie of this sort, one thing about Tom Zimbrod that I think some people may not really notice is that he's a great physical actor. Like, this guy is physically capable of pulling off some things that would require for a character of this sort to have that menacing body language behind him, and also at the same time providing the voice of which he does provide for the character of Knucklebones, although it is slightly modulated too to fit the overall feel of the character, if you will. But Tom Zimbrod is one of those guys that when I see his name on the marquee, I know it's going to be top quality stuff in terms of his performance, because I do know that whenever he's invested into a role, he's invested 100%, and he's always going to bring it no matter what. That has always been my experience with him when it comes to his performances in the films he's ever been in. So this movie was no different as well. When you buy the Blu-ray to this movie, you're going to see the original audition tape that Tom Zimbrod had auditioned for this role. And that was the audition that won Mitch over to convince him that this guy is going to be Knucklebones. This guy is great as Knucklebones. And that audition tape certainly does provide some of that creepy factor that the character does have, that Tom does brilliantly in that audition, which I thought was fascinating in my opinion. And I'm so glad they were able to show that here so that we can see exactly what it was that had won him, that made him the perfect choice for this character. Because when you watch the movie and you watch the audition tape, there's no one else in my mind that could have taken over that role to be able to portray the character of Knucklebones. Now, some people will also point out too, because I think I did some recent reviews, that they thought the title of this film was kind of dumb. I don't care. I thought the title was kind of funny, actually. And to be frank with you, too, when I heard that that's the actual name of the character for this movie in Knucklebones, there was some charm about it that I actually took away from it as well, too. So, again, the movie's self-aware of what it is, and it's not hiding that at all. So for someone to say that the movie has a dumb title, I don't really care. You can name a character anything. As long as the character is good and may have the most silliest names, it doesn't really matter. So the fact that the character stands out in that respect, despite the silly name to a lot of people, which in my mind is a little silly, but I think it works well considering the circumstances of this film. I think worked absolutely wonderful in my opinion. Now, the overall story in itself, I'm going to point out is that, as I mentioned briefly in the plot synopsis, it does follow a group of kids who inadvertently find this game that is more or less kind of like a Jumanji type of game where you throw these dice and you move the pieces around. And then some things that start to occur. In this case, they wake up the demon in Knucklebones. So you find a bit of a backstory about what his overall story is and how he was brought more or less into this world, which involved the Nazis, which I won't reveal too much here because I think when you watch the film, you may actually enjoy that aspect of that revelation when you watch the film along the way, which actually was kind of enjoyable for me personally, especially when you get towards the end as well, too. But when you start to understand that backstory of the character of Knucklebones, you also get to learn more about the overall history of how people were just fucked up along the way, and they were willing to do anything to win in order for them to get an advantage. In this case, we want to bring a demon here to more or less take over the world, if you will. So I thought that aspect of it, which in a lot of ways kind of like a social commentary, if you think about it that way, if you really dig in deep, you kind of figure out that there might be some things that Mitch might be pointing out here that talks about how people are in a nutshell, more or less. So I think that movie does actually showcase some side of society where people are fucked up in the head and they're willing to take a great risk to be able to gain the momentum for themselves or whatever it is that they believe in to get ahead of the curve, if you will. So I think that actually was handled quite well. And then the story is just about survival. Can you side with the characters? As I mentioned before, you can. And you get a final girl in this movie too, where when you learn about her character along the way, again, without really revealing too much, you find out where she's at in the beginning of the film, and then the story progresses along the way. You get to learn more about how she's learning to deal with her struggles. And then once you get to the end, that's when you really get to see the change in the character. Now, whether you side or not at that point, it's going to be entirely up to you. But I will say this here, I was all in on that, and I was all for it because understanding that journey and seeing what she had gone through, it all made absolute sense for me. And in fact, it's one of those things that you can truly root for, at least in my opinion, and not feel bad about it at all. So that's the one thing about this movie that I thoroughly enjoy, that, it's questionable, but you know what, the way I see it, fuck it. I'm on this person's side at the end of the day. So that's what it was all about. And I think this movie did accomplish that here for me. So there's certainly a lot more that I want to delve into as well too, but that would be more into that spoiler territory. So for right now, that's going to be it for my positives. So now let's get into my negatives. The only real negative that I have with the film is not necessarily with the look of Knucklebones. It was just more about how there were certain sequences in the film where the look of Knucklebones wasn't really all that good, because there were some other sequences where you get to see that you can clearly tell that Tom had the prosthetics on him and it looked great. In fact, I'm sure I'll show an actual image from a scene in the movie where you can see how well it was put together. And I'm forgetting the name of the guys who had put the prosthetics together, the makeup department that helped with putting Knucklebones here. These are some quality guys that have worked on Beetlejuice, Planet of the Apes, Halloween, among other things as well, to like top tier projects. And they've taken the time to be able to work on this independent project, which didn't have a lot of money, And they definitely did a good job, but there were certain moments where I felt like the look of the character just didn't really hold up all that well. And I'm sure a lot of it simply had to do with maybe with just timing. It was certainly hot that during the production as well, because I think they shot this in August. And I'm sure that he had something to do with that as well, kind of giving it that dry look where some things might look like it was peeling off a bit here and there. But overall, though, the look of the character was fantastic, but it's just certain moments in the film where it just didn't really work for me that well. But it was just far in between. And honestly, I had so much with the movie that I was easily able to overlook that. The other thing I think I can point out here too is that there were certain sound. The sound editing didn't really work that well for me personally in certain sequences here and there. It wasn't like it was absolutely terrible. That's not what I'm getting at. But you can tell that in certain sequences, when you hear Knucklebones talk or how the sound was edited together, it worked fantastically. And then other moments, for some reason, it didn't have that same momentum. So it seemed like it kind of just it happened far in between. But when it did happen, it was very noticeable for me personally. And it was always something that I noticed every single time I watched the film. I've seen this movie over 6 times at this point, but every single time I watched the movie, that's one of the things that always sticks out for me, which I always felt like was a nitpick, a major nitpick on my end. But again, I enjoyed the film, that I was able to overlook all that. So, that's really all I can say right now about the movie as far as the negatives concerned, because I do know that if you're not into horror, you're going to look at the characters and say, these characters are just just body bags. Their story's not that interesting. And I can see all that. I can understand where your point of view may come from. But for someone who grew up with this type of stuff and still loves it to this day, and there are people out there who are still making films of this sort, I'm absolutely just overjoyed that we still have films that come out of this sort that stay true to that essence of what we grew up with here, but adding their own bit of a flavor as well too, to change the genre, but just change the momentum to be able to try something new, try something different with whatever limited resources they have, and still make the best film they can. And that's exactly what I felt like we got from Knucklebones here. So that's going to be more or less the end of my negative. I kind of more or less ended on a positive here, but now let's get into my rating. So I love this movie. I think this movie, if you're a horror fan, you will love it. There's a lot of great qualities about this film that you will certainly take away from it. I meant to say that I believe that it's meant to be fun. You should watch it with a group of friends. I didn't watch it with anybody other than myself, which is mostly the case here. But to be able to watch this movie with a group of friends who really do enjoy these type of films, I think that's the best way to watch this movie, because there is a lot of great fun factors about this film. I completely forgot to mention about the kills in this movie too, which I'm so sorry to bring it up until now. But the kills in this film are far exceeding than what I expected, because I honestly was kind of expecting a tame version of the kills with maybe 1 or 2 big major kills. No, there are some kills that happen throughout the film that are just over the top, and I loved it. I thought this movie did a really good job in not holding back on that and just going all the way through and try to take it as far as they can, and they've done a great job with that as well. There's one in particular scene where it involves two people having sex with each other, which I thought was you could see it coming a mile away, but when it happens, I was just overjoyed, because it's not something we see often in films of this sort, at least as of now, when you have more horror films that come out where people are having sex and they get killed. It's not the most interesting way, but this movie just takes it to that whole other level where they are really just going that far and doing some crazy shit. So I really love the fact that they have taken the time to be able to make the kills memorable in a lot of ways, and also just to make it fun as well too. So for me, I give this movie a solid cheers. Those are my thoughts on the film. If you have seen the movie, let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. I'll also be sure to have a link where you can buy the movie on Blu-ray, which is the Unrated Directors Cut, which is the version I think you all should watch. It's the best version of the film, because there is the original cut of the movie that came out back in 2016 that's still available on Tubi, which I'll also have in the link description down below for you guys to check out that version if you want to see that as well. But I highly recommend you guys go out of your way to buy this movie. You can buy it on Blu-ray. I think it's for $14.99 if I recall correctly. So when you go in the link, just check it out. Buy the film. I think it's absolutely worth it, especially if you're a horror fan like myself. This is a film worth having in your collection here. So make sure you guys check out the film and comment below if you have already seen the movie, and I would love to hear your thoughts. Whether you love it or hate it, still want to hear your thoughts. And also, if you haven't done so already, subscribe to the NRW. Make sure you share, like our videos, hit the notification bell while you're down there as well too. And also follow NRW on social media, on Instagram, New Release Wednesdays, on Facebook, Nerds Rule the World, and on Twitter at the NRW. And you can follow me on my social media accounts on Instagram and Facebook. On Instagram and Twitter, I meant to say Mr. Rob Medina, and on Facebook, Rob Medina. And I have a show on the channel called You're So Cool with Rob Medina. And I have a social media for the show as well, too. On Instagram, You're So Cool with Rob Medina. And on Twitter, You're So Cool with WRM. And until next time, everybody, hope you guys have a wonderful day. Stay safe out there. And cheers.